Notes has 4 Steven Wilson albums. He is ready for the 5th. What does Notes have? Depression. Depression. Notes has depression. The Raven That Refused to Sing and Other Ghost Stories by Steven Wilson. So, The Raven That Refused to Sing, or as I'll call it from now on, The Raven by Steven Wilson, is Steven Wilson's 3rd full-length studio album. This is hot off the trails of Grace for Drowning, the double album that he put out. And The Raven was the most realized of all of Steven's work up until this point. Insurgents and Grace for Drowning, it was kind of a mixed grab bag for different types of songs. You had a lot of contrasts between light and dark. You had a lot of songs that sounded in one particular genre and then another song in a completely different one. The Raven is the first one that has a very unified sound throughout the entire run. And it is, I'd probably say, my favorite work from him. It is the most proggy, it is the most experimental, and it is the most safe one as well, because it doesn't do a whole lot of different things on the album. Like, it does the one thing, a progressive rock, to a T. And I am blown away every single time I listen to it. I know Anthony Fantano, the Needle Drop, when he was reviewing this, he said that he really got down and studied progressive rock. And I mean, at this point in his career, he was doing a lot of remixing and a lot of remastering of past prog masterpieces, like a lot of King Crimson stuff, like a lot of Jethro Tull stuff, like a lot of Yes stuff. So he was using a lot of those techniques from the yesteryear and applying it here. And this almost felt like, and this is Anthony's words and not mine, it felt like this was a homework project where he had to report on the different techniques of progressive rock. And I wouldn't say that's completely unfounded. Like, that feels very, very true here. It does feel like a progressive rock album that harkens back to yesteryear. But unlike Anthony, I don't find that as a knock against it. I think it works very much to the advantage of the album. And each song is kind of structured in that sense. We have Luminal, The Holy Drinker, and The Watchmaker being kind of the odd number songs on this. I mean, Luminal's track 1, The Holy Drinker is track 3, and The Watchmaker is track 5. And all of these songs inch over the 10-minute mark, so very, very proggy in length. And each one goes on one hell of a journey. Luminal definitely is my favorite track on this album, just with the turns and twists that this guy goes through. What I love is that we were actually introduced to this from the Get All You Deserve DVD Blu-ray that he was promoting with Grace for Drowning. But what he did on this track, I believe, outperforms what they were doing in the live show. Because within the live show, I think they were still writing it, still getting it to perfection. And what they have on the album is the perfected, finalized product. And what I mean by that is the song is structured pretty rigidly. We have an opening piece with a little bit of a jazz movement. We have it where it slows down into a kind of a thoughtful rambunctiousness. And then what we have from there is my favorite point on the album. When it slows down into that burst where it changes completely into that mellotron, and that mellotron is just dripping. And after the mellotron, and it kind of goes into the next wave. In the live performance, it's just a higher octave on the mellotron. But here, it's a really gnarly track. Like, it's almost like what Vandergraaf was using with their mellotrons, where it just didn't sound right, and it's grinding. And then after that, we have the next movement being that heavenly, up the octave mellotron, and it just jives so well within one another that I just can't help but just melt when I hear that. Now, the Holy Drinker as well as the Watchmaker feel very, very similar, at least within the structure of the song. Both are longer pieces, again, more than 10 minutes long, and much like Luminal, these guys twist and turn, but a lot more unstructured than Luminal. Where Luminal was a little bit more structured, the Holy Drinker and the Watchmaker are less so. They don't really repeat any themes. And the Holy Drinker is probably one of the more darker moments on this album, because the album overall is probably the darkest he's done. And the Watchmaker kind of doing that same thing where it's, again, ebbing and flowing all over the place, always shifting, always changing. But once we come down to the breakdown and we have that very mellow ending where it's just a piano that slowly builds, and then just death and destruction. It hits you so hard. So the even number tracks, let's talk a little bit about those. We have Drive Home, which is kind of the first single and actually produced the EP of Drive Home, the title track. I really enjoyed this. I like where this goes. I love the play out guitars on this, and it's one of the more realized, I guess, traditional songs where we have verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. And I really enjoyed that. I feel like it's really needed, and it's really the only one that really fits that description. Now, the Pin Drop being the fourth track is probably the lower portion on this album. It's the only real low point, but I can't fault it because I know Steven's singing an octave higher than he's used to, and it just, I don't know, for a little bit it doesn't quite work, but it's not until we get into the chorus of the track where I'm like, okay, now we're getting some momentum here. Now we're really playing within the box that we've set down for us. It's also probably the most happy song, or at least the most joyous song, and I don't know if that works to its advantage. Now, the closer track, The Raven That Refused to Sing. Dear Lord, is this guy heavy and beautiful. The most somber track by far on the album, and the most beautiful. It's very, very slow burning throughout the whole track, but once we get to that end, it's such a beautiful, beautiful payoff. I haven't really talked too much about the concept of this album, because normally I talk about the concept of the album first and then I get into the music, but here I really needed to talk about the music first before I got into the concept, because the concept overall is that all of these stories are in some way, shape, or form a ghost story. Either the individual's being haunted by something, either by past mistakes, past choices, or just the circumstance that people find themselves in. And that's a really beautiful sentiment. It's almost like a sentimental horror story in that sense, and it's really hard to do without being either laughably melancholy or overly dramatic. But here it's balanced very, very well, and it works so well to the album's overall effect. So, I mean, overall, I love this album. It was my favorite album of 2013. If I had been reviewing albums then, it would have been the first album that I would have given this review to new, because it is the only album that I've heard since it that right from the get-go I knew I was dealing with an absolute masterpiece.
We're not worthy! We're not worthy! We're not worthy!
And unlike other albums that I've listened to and I've grown to love, I have zero problem giving that album a stamp of a masterpiece, because it really is. It balances so many things so well that every time I listen to it, I get moved. So that's about it for The Raven That Refused to Sing. What did you guys think about it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know by commenting down below. I was doing this album, as I said, as a lead up to the Bone, the new album that's coming out next month. I've already reviewed his first album, Insurgence, as well as Grace for Drowning. You can find both of those down below, as well as within the end screen where I've left the playlist. And this actually concludes my look back at Steven's career, because I've already reviewed Hand Cannot Erase. Thank you guys so much for tuning in for all that. I've been having a blast looking back to this. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.